Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last session of the day. This is going to be a great feature presentation from the amazing Carl Hooker, and we'll get started in just a few minutes' time. This session is going to be a great one. It's titled Ready, Set, Fail, Using Risk-Taking and Failure to Unlock Creativity. And I've had a lot of questions about this session, actually, asking what it's going to be about, and people are very intrigued as to what will come. So I didn't give away too much. Carl's backstage. Don't worry, Carl. I'll lift it all up to you. But there is a lot to come in this session. We've got an hour from Carl where he'll be sharing all he has to know, all his expertise, and all of it is also in his book, which, if you've noticed, is actually in the Wakelet Community Week competition. So if you want to get your hands on this, along with some Wakelet Community Week swag, some iPads as well, and even a trip to ISTE 2023, make sure you take part in our Wakelet Community Week competition. All you need to do, anything that you find interesting, anything that you like from these sessions, screen grab it, quote it, share it on social, and each post will be an entry into that competition to win some of those amazing prizes. And also, a lot of people will be asking about certificates. Of course, we'll give you a certificate at the end of this session. Check the chat towards the end. We'll drop a link in where you can access that, fill out your details, and get your PD certificate for today. But without further ado, I think it's time we bring Carl on. Hey, Carl.
Hey, how's everyone doing?
I'm ready. Awesome.
I'm ready to win my trip to ISTE 2023. I want to learn too, James. I gotta make sure I post. I'm gonna take a screenshot of my own session and post it just to take a risk.
Maybe, yeah. You might even win one of your own books as well.
that would be great. My wife would be happy about that. I already have a bunch here.
Yeah, this is Carl's obviously first session at Wakelet Community Week. So everyone in the chat, please give Carl a huge, warm Wakelet welcome. This is going to be an absolutely awesome session. Please ask questions in the chat. Please share your thoughts with us. And yeah, Carl, please do take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone in the Wakelet community for having me to wrap up day 2 of the Community Week. And I see some familiar names in the chat and some new friends as well from Ukraine, from Dallas, from Bulgaria, from Toronto. Thank you guys so much for joining us today on this session called Ready, Set, Fail, based on the book. This is actually a session that I've been doing for quite a while. I've added some new parts to it. And so some of you that have seen me speak in the past, you might see some new nuggets in there. Some of you that have never seen me speak, well, this will be new for you as well. So a little bit quick background on myself. This is all the important stuff, right? The stat sheet of what makes me who I am. So 24 years in education, written 7 books. I'm a national faculty member for Future Ready Schools. We started a social media platform called K12leaders.com actually in January, which is a great community of educators. It's basically we're gathering in a social platform together to talk about all the challenges of education as well as helping each other out, as this has been an interesting last couple of years, to say the least. But going back a little bit to my past, just to give you a little bit more about myself. Speaking of risk-taking, this was me when I was about 12 years old. And if you look at those jorts right there, you can tell that I was definitely a risk-taker at an early age. I don't quite know what was happening there. I promise I will not bring that fashion sense back to ISTE 2022 or 23. I'll just save you all from that. Actually, this is me when I first started out in education. Guys, this was 2001. This is, I think, the 3rd or 4th year I'd been teaching. And by the way, if you can't see me, I'm right there. And what was amazing to me early on in my educational career was that a lot of times kids, they get kind of stuck in the system of, let's always make sure that the teacher is approving what we're doing. Let's make sure that we're always checking the box, staying within the lines, completing the worksheet, filling in the bubble. And with these kids, I started to realize, even at an early age of 6 years old, that they had these amazing creative ideas, but a lot of time the system of education was really stopping them from really kind of pursuing it further. And a lot of it came because of the fact that in this particular school, in this district that I worked at, there was this feeling that, why should we take a risk and change something? Because we've been successful with air quotes, because honestly, that success is predicated upon test results. It was predicated upon, whether or not kids were going to college, which I think is an important part, but it's not the only metric of success. Obviously, guys, we're in this for the outcome, not the income when it comes to education. And so a lot of what we're trying to do with our students is make them life ready, not just college ready, right? And so some of that part of life is taking risks. I'm going to play a quick video snippet for you. This is from Ed Catmull from Pixar. So I'm actually going to switch screens really quick just so you can hear it. I'll do the shared audio in the screen itself. But Ed Catmull is the former president of Pixar, And I love this little snippet that he shares right here. This is on a podcast that he did a few years back. And essentially, he's going to talk about, why, sometimes when you're really successful, that can actually be a dangerous thing. And so listen to this for just a second, and then let me know if you have any kind of takeaways or comments about it too in the chat. So let me rewind this just a smidget. There we go. And then hopefully y'all can hear this okay.
As you become more successful, people don't want to tell you stuff. It's one of the great traps of being a leader, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The success actually is a pressure towards conservatism.
Explain. I mean, I understand it, but explain it.
Well, okay, so you're doing something right. Like in our case, you make a movie and you've got these different groups,
right,
who are making it. And we're making another movie, and each movie is a risk. Who wants to be the first one to screw up?
Right.
Right.
Kill the golden egg. The goose is laying the golden egg. So I'm going to crack.
Yeah, this process works. I'm going to stick with what works. If you've fallen flat on your face and you say, try something new, it's actually easier to do it if you've failed.
Yeah.
But if you've been successful, it's actually a little harder to try something different.
Right.
At the same time, if you don't try something different, you fall behind and you become stale.
Kind of an interesting thought there, right? And so some of you I've already seen in the chat have mentioned this too. It's like there's this idea that, if you're at a place or a campus that maybe has had a lot of success in the past, and it's sometimes harder to change from that belief. So I think it's interesting too, because what ends up happening is this mindset kind of permeates throughout institutions. And so this belief of like, why should I change? Why should I change and take a risk? Because we've already been successful. I'll give you a great example. My school I used to work at up till a couple of years ago, Westlake High School here in Austin, Texas. In 2011, we rolled out what was then the first comprehensive K-12 one-to-one program, one-to-one iPads in 2011. This is way back. Like, remember when the first one came out and it didn't have a camera? That's how far back we went, guys. So yes, big risk. Eventually, we did get the camera on iPad too. But that school, 99% of those students were accepted into a four-year college. And so at that moment, this question I got back and forth from teachers all over. We're doing great. Why should we change? Yes, thanks, Debbie. Yes, iPad Palooza. Yes, it's a shout out. You can see it behind me. Actually, there's t-shirts right behind me. So again, thinking about this this idea of success and failure, you think about different companies out there. Now, again, institution of school is a lot different than business, but there is some similarities that we can glean. For example, Blockbuster. Some of you may or may not know the story of Blockbuster, what happened near the end. But in 2001, Blockbuster was approached by a little company then that went by the name of Netflix. And they essentially were doing DVDs in the mail, for those of you that are old enough to remember that, or they had that service wherever you live. And they said, we would like you to buy us, essentially buy us out for I think it was $50 million, which is a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. But at the time, Blockbuster was on just a rocket for success. They were on their way up. By 2004, Blockbuster would have 8,900 stores in the United States. And they basically said, yeah, we're not going to DVDs in the mail. Who's going to do that? And then they said, well, we're going to put movies on the internet. No one's ever going to watch that. The internet is too slow. And so they turned it down. Well, now there are no Blockbusters left. Again, cautionary tale here. There's one left, I guess, in Oregon that you can go to and visit. But for the most part, again, innovation when you're successful is sometimes hard. Think about what the number one taxi industry is in the United States, right? It's Uber, and they don't own a single car. The number one hotel industry is Airbnb, and they don't own a single piece of property. The number one retail store is not Walmart. It's actually Amazon, and they don't own a single store. Although now they do have these stores. I don't know if you've seen these Amazon.com or Amazon Go stores, but essentially what happens is you got this guy, he kind of walks in, and again, watch what happens. Never have to actually talk to anybody. You just grab some stuff off the shelf. It automatically registers to your Amazon cart as you walk out, right? Right there, boom, it just charged your Amazon cart. So again, these changes happen in companies that have been successful. You see some really famous ones here, by the way, and some classics. Again, for those of you from the US, some of these probably stand out. I know a lot of you are joining us from different countries. So some of these may not be so familiar, but again, some computer companies that are no longer here, some travel companies that are no longer here, airlines. It's interesting how some companies who were successful for a period of time are no longer successful, no longer even in existence. So my question for you, and since some of you are in the chat, I would love to get some feedback on this. Why is failure important? Think about that for just a second. Type a comment in the chat. We'll pull a couple up here on the screen. But why is it important? And then specifically, why is that an important thing to happen in schools? Why is failure something that we should start doing more of in schools? And thank you to Wakelet for posting it also in the chat as well. Because the truth is, failure is treated as a bad word in schools. Yes, that's right, Stephanie. We need to learn from it. We got to learn from those mistakes. I've once asked an audience recently, I was doing a talk up in New York, and I asked them, I said, how many of you have ever failed? And almost everybody raises their hand. I mean, some people don't want to admit it. Some people, they do what I call the T-Rex arm, where they put their hand up really small. They don't really raise it all the way high because they're embarrassed to mention it. But the truth is, we've all failed at some point. But I would say that if you've learned from a failure, if you've learned from a mistake, then you're truly not a failure. That's just part of the learning process. Yes, I love some of the comments here. It helps you learn from mistakes. First attempt in learning. Yes, Jennifer, we'll see that in a little bit too. That's a famous quote from a professor from India, actually, who started that whole FAIL. It's important because you have to try something new or different. That's also true. Great comments coming in here as well. I love it. Thank you guys for sharing. Very interactive crowd today. Fail forward to find success through it. Yes. Now, the flip side of this is that with these risks and failures comes a fear. And the truth is, in education, we struggle with this just like every other business. If you're an educational leader that's listening to this right now, if you're someone who is a leader of a school or a leader of a district, you too are concerned about, well, if we try something different and it fails, a lot of bad things could happen, right? And unfortunately, in our day and age today, that means it could be on the news, it could be on social media, it could be everywhere. So there's this flip side of risk and failure. So one of the things I like to do with students and also teachers is go ahead and reflect on some failures that are pretty famous. So some of these you may have heard of, some of these you may not. This first one, I'm just going to play you a little sound, see if you can hear it. Let me turn that down a little bit. Anyone have a guess as to who this is? You can hear a little bit of just music in the background. This gentleman, who I will reveal in just a second, I'm going to give you guys a chance to take a guess. This gentleman appears on stage in the 1930s in Kansas City, and he starts playing this off-rhythm kind of music. Louis Armstrong is a great guess. You're close. Charlie Parker, Casey, bingo. Yes, we have our first. Take a screenshot of that. That goes toward the Wakelet award-winning community right there. Yes, Charlie Parker gets up on stage, starts playing this off-rhythm kind of music. And at the time, jazz music hadn't really done anything, hadn't taken off yet. And as a 16-year-old, if you can imagine it, the drummer actually was so offended by the way he was playing this offbeat, off-rhythm style that he takes a cymbal off of his drum set and just hits him right in the back of the head with it and boos him off stage. They basically boo him off stage. He's left kind of in tears with literally a painful failure in the back of his head, only to come back later and work with others like Miles Davis, Louis Armstrong, some of you mentioned, to bring back jazz and kind of the modern era of what jazz music is today. So again, sometimes failure comes with some pain. This gentleman is an interesting one. He is an author of several books, the last of which he wrote in 1983 was not very successful. So much so that the author, the publisher actually said, you need to not write anymore. And I wonder if anyone knows who this is. I'll see if I can play it up a little bit. You may know this theme song. Anyway, this is the author of the series. It's called A Song of Ice and Fire, which would later become Game of Thrones, which was a big hit over the last decade, I would say, here in the U.S. and also all over the world. So yes, George R.R. Martin. In fact, his publisher said, "You're such a bad writer." Again, he quit writing for 10 years because he was just an epic failure with it. He thought it just was not good. He had such a big flop, and then he came out with a series of books that would become this. And I don't know. Yes, good job there in the quotes there. Some of you are getting it. By the way, I don't know how many of you have seen Game of Thrones, so I'm just going to warn you because this next part, if you've heard about it, those of you that have seen it know this. The ending, everyone was a little bit worried about. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler here. Just be careful. If you've never seen the end, it's really strange what happens at the end of this movie, and I still can't figure it out. But here's what happens. Yeah, it's the strangest ending to a movie I've ever seen. Not really, but yes. By the way, if you love your cat, you too can buy this on Amazon. Anyway, leads me to my next point, which is not all risks are successful, just like that cat thing that we just saw there. Kind of strange. So we can go back throughout history and see this. You remember, the Zeppelins. They were blowing up back in the day, literally and figuratively. Ford had the Edsel, which was just this lemon of a vehicle that everyone thought was going to be this amazing thing, and it could never quite work the way it was built. I'm a big fan of Apple. You know, I do a lot of work with Apple and Apple products, and so one of the ones I always love is this is the Apple Lisa, which is just kind of a strange looking, odd computer with these two. This is going to bring, some of you are way too young to notice any of the stuff on here, but you know, the dual disk drives, amazing graphic interface, a clever pointing device called a mouse, unlimited power, unlimited expandability. Yes, that's right. Look at this. Yes, it's amazing because that thing also, by the way, named after Steve Jobs' daughter, never really took off. Again, another failure. For me, a couple other things here. This was a big thing back in the 80s, New Coke. And some of you may remember in the chat what this was replaced with later. There's a whole, if you want to have like 5 minutes of your life and just go down a rabbit hole, look at the conspiracy theories behind New Coke, because there's a lot of things that the reason why it was brought up and the whole reasoning behind it was interesting. So I won't spoil it, but if you have a chance, go back and look at that. Of course, it was replaced later by Coca-Cola Classic. Yes. Yes, exactly. And then, not to be outdone, we have, of course, you know, Pepsi Clear, which kind of looked a little bit like corn syrup. Yes. Yeah. Linda got it. Classic Coke. Thank you, Linda. Good job there. And then my own shameful admittance. So back in the early 80s, they had these little things called cassingles, which was a little cassette tape that would only play one song. It played one song on one side, and then you flip it over and it'd play another song on the other side. One of the first ones I ever owned was this band right here, and we'll see if somebody can guess what it is. I'll play a little bit of it. We don't sing any of our own songs. Yes, that's right. Milli Vanilli, the first band I ever owned. They were ahead of their time. If only they weren't a real band. Come on, Deborah. They were, if they would have been around during COVID, they could have played with masks because no one ever would have known they were lip syncing. See, they were just a little bit ahead of their time. By the way, this picture, I showed this video to my kids, and they're like, "Dad, what is that red box that he's standing in?" And I was like, "It's a phone booth." Never mind, you'll never know what they are. But when you think about these companies, think about, you know, they've all had failures, but they're all had successes as well. Another couple quick examples here. One, you know, Apple, who I mentioned before, they, you know, during the .com bust in the early 2000s, there was this kind of period of time where all these tech companies were falling apart and tech giants were folding left and right. And there was this urgency to cut people, to cut expenses, just to survive. Apple decided to take a risk and go the opposite direction. What they started to do was, instead, is they said, you know what, we're going to invest in research and development. We're going to invest in this R&D and start to develop new technologies now while people are going the opposite direction. And out of that, they actually created what was originally the iPod Touch. If you remember, this iPod with a little spinny wheel, which would then become an iPod, or that was an iPod, and then an iPod Touch, and then an iPhone, then an iPad. Anyway, again, through that risk and through that moment when everyone was going one direction, they decided to go the opposite direction. It doesn't always work that way, but it did in the case of Apple. Now, another thing that we like to think about is that risk and failure definitely go hand in hand. You know, there's always that idea that fear is kind of the underlying metric here, but the truth is, when you're trying something different, there's a tremendous opportunity that you're going to fail. And I say tremendous opportunity because, honestly, whenever we are faced with challenges in life, in your schools where you're working at, you know, as a former tech director, there were days where kids were getting into mischief. If you can imagine 8,000 kids all with devices in their hands going home, this is way before any of this was regular. I had all sorts of interesting things happen, and it was a lot of risk and a lot of failure. I'll admit it. And I think that's just part of being someone who's out there on the forefront. So I think it's an interesting, you know, when you think about this dynamic of, if you want to try something different, you have to also be willing to accept the risk of that failure. I think that's something that we as school teachers and leaders need to think about as well. I'll give you a quick example, and then I'm going to ask you guys, actually, while I'm showing you this example, I want you to reflect on a time you failed. And because I'm a little bit ahead of you, I think I'm about 30 seconds ahead of you in the video, I'm going to ask you for it now. So think about a time you took a risk and failed, and then I want you to drop that in the comments, because I'm going to share you a quick story about my own. This was recent. This was right before the pandemic. We were heading up to, my wife and I headed up to Boston. And, there's this place in Boston called Martha's Vineyard, which is this beautiful island with sand and beaches all around it. And we get off of this ferry, and there's this Jeep sitting here. And my wife has always had this dream of wanting to ride a Jeep on the beach. And so the guy's like, yeah, take the Jeep, go out there's a little place where you can go out onto the beach, grab a hold of that, make sure you're in 4-wheel drive, and then just jump on the sand and start going. Well, in different parts of the world, sand on beach can be easy to drive on, and other parts it can't. So in our minds, my wife thought it would kind of be this kind of picturesque moment, riding on the beach. Everything is just amazing. We're flying through the beach. There's people there. We're having fun. It's great. It's just this, beautiful day, beautiful sun, watching out for people there. But the truth was something else happened. And the beach in Martha's Vineyard is very, how will we say this? It's hard to drive on. I'll just say that. And all of a sudden, yeah, all of a sudden our Jeep had become buried in this sand, and within about 300 feet, it just started to kind of sink. And to make matters worse, we at this point were both of our phones were almost dead. I mean, I snapped this picture right when my wife was about to absolutely lose it. She's like, no, what are you doing? I was like, I have to take a picture of this just in case, just because I think it's funny, not knowing that the tide was about to come in, and it's Sunday in Martha's Vineyard, and on Sunday in Martha's Vineyard, the police don't answer the phone. So we got an answering machine, and didn't know what was going to happen. We're like, how are we going to get out of here? And it's one of those situations where when we reflect on that risk, and we reflect about the time, yes, Peggy, you knew it was coming at some point, right? Yeah, luckily, I will tell you just real quick, just so you know, because I want to make sure you know, we were able to get someone pulled up onto the beach. They deflated the air in their tires about halfway, and they were able to almost ride like tank treads on the beach and pull us out, which the guy didn't tell us originally. So again, part of our risk was, we wanted to go on the beach, but part of our failure was, we didn't actually, let me go back on that. We didn't actually know, some of it was failure because of lack of preparation. Failure was lack of knowledge in this case. So again, yeah, fire department, we tried a little bit of everything. So reflect on a time that you took a risk and failed. And again, if you have a moment, feel free, if you feel comfortable doing so, feel free to drop it in the chat. And we're talking professional here. We're not going to, let's not get into personal. That's a different session, guys, if we're talking about personal risks and failures. Although a part of what we do professionally does affect us personally. So I don't want to dismiss that. I do think it's important, though, when we're thinking about kind of times in our lives or things that we did professionally that maybe didn't work out. Maybe it was trying a new strategy in your classroom, or teaching a group of teachers. This happens to me quite a bit. Teaching a group of teachers a new skill or new tool or something about, let's say, Wakelet, right? And all of a sudden the internet isn't working, and you're like, Wakelet is a web-based tool. What just happened? And so there's times when those risks happen and you fail, but it's all in how you recover from the failure. I'm going to tell you a couple other examples here in a minute of things that I've tried that have just never worked. I feel like I fail every day. And I think in some ways there's something affirming about this. And I see a couple of you thank you so much for sharing a couple of examples there in the chat. Yeah, and I think it's Nicole started a character ed program at a new school, and the staff didn't all buy in. Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes when you have these ideas, and I think Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think that's his quote. You can have this amazing idea, this policy, this strategy, this new task that you want everyone to try, but the culture has to be willing to accept it as well. And I think that's a big part of everything. Even if you're saying, hey, we're going to come into our schools and start taking more risks. If the culture isn't ready for that, and if there isn't clear expectations around it, it's also going to fail, and it'll fail disastrously. So I'm going to share a little bit at the end of a couple of different ideas and strategies around how to do this in your own schools. But I do think you're right. I think a lot of times you're starting something different. And oh no, Angela said she started a Wakelet session and only 2 teachers came. So, again, learning from it again and thinking, okay, why did that happen? What was something I tried? Maybe I needed to make sure I advertise it more. Maybe I need to make sure that, my content was what people wanted, kind of reflecting on your own. But at the same time, I would say 2 people is a success, because I've done sessions for thousands of people and I've done sessions for just a couple. It happens. It doesn't, it sometimes it just depends on timing. That's a big part of failure too. I think you could have a great idea and a great, I remember there's this thing, I don't know if you guys remember, it was called Second Life. It was like this online world where you could travel with a little avatar, and like I think when you appeared, you didn't have any clothes on either. It was really strange and weird colored hair. But like ISTE had an island on there, and you could learn on this ISTE island. Well, that was 2001, 2002, 2003. And it was ahead of its time in a lot of ways, but it never really took off. If we had something like that during the pandemic, think about how great that would be. And there's a lot of companies that scrambled to make that during the pandemic. Let's get along. Let's meet in virtual rooms. Now we have virtual headsets and we can do all this. But yeah, it's just interesting how sometimes timing plays a part in that as well. Thank you, Peggy, for remembering Second Life there as well. Juan, Nicole, Angela, thank you guys so much too for sharing just a few ideas of failures. And again, when you've taken a risk and maybe it didn't quite work out the same way. So we're going to pick in on a couple different things right now, because really all of this is leading our students toward creativity and innovation. It's one thing to take risks. And I always say, you got to be careful when you just say, hey, just take a risk. It's really easy, right? We're just, it's not just about that. You have to be taking thoughtful risks, and risks that allow kids to have some sort of innovative growth, creative mindsets, however you want to call it. But the idea is that you're creating an atmosphere where new things can be discovered in your classroom and in your schools. And if you're in a school that is fear-based, or that there's a community that is fear-based, or that is afraid to try something new, that really becomes a roadblock to creativity. And it's something that, to be honest, is quite stifling. I don't know how many of you have worked in an environment like this where you feel like, I am afraid to try something different. I'm afraid that maybe my boss will say something about it, or a colleague even. I've seen this a lot in schools where you work in teams with teachers, and sometimes there may be a team leader that's like, no, don't try something new. We want to make sure we're always doing something, kind of just the same that we've always done it, right? It's always something different there. And so I'm going to kind of list a few barriers of creativity that I've experienced over my career, and also personally and professionally. And some of these may speak to you too as an audience. And this first one is this kind of discomfort with the unknown. And the idea is that, you don't know when, what direction things are going to go in, right? Oh, we could have, we're going to try this new tool with technology, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, now it's, it may not work. So maybe we shouldn't try it. Maybe we should just stick with what we've always done. And I think we see this a lot, those of you that work in the ed tech space, when it comes to trying new things with technology. There is a fear that trying something new and stepping out there and doing something different could lead to a path that we don't know. And the truth is that tells us, well, maybe we shouldn't be as creative or as innovative, because it's dangerous, right? In our minds, it could be something bad. But the truth is, it could also be something amazing. And I think that's the balance that we have to think about as teachers. Another one here, treating not knowing as a permanent condition. And again, this idea that it's permanent means that, and I see this a lot with teachers where they're working in schools. And by the way, they've taken a look at this on a CT scan. I just got a picture of it. Let me pull it up here. Where they actually see what the brain looks like when they feel like they don't know something. Oh, there it is right there. Not really. But the truth is, treating this idea that we don't know is a permanent condition. So those of you that teach math and those of you that teach maybe art, you experience this sometimes. And it's this, a student would come into your classroom and say, yeah, I just don't get math. I'm not a math person. Adults say this all the time. And again, as someone who is teaching this, you're probably thinking to yourself, am I just not going to teach you today? And so when I encounter different teachers who do this, sometimes we'll go into workshops and teacher will say, well, I just don't get technology. I always tell them, I was like, hey, you're not going to I'm not just going to say today's your day, you don't have to learn anything. What are you going to say to that student that doesn't get technology? Of course, you're going to encourage them to continue to learn it. That student that doesn't get math, you're going to encourage them to continue to learn it. And I always like to use the power of yet too. And that is, we don't know it yet. There's an opportunity that we're going to learn it at some point. And then as Debbie says there in the chat, but we've always done it this way, or that's the way we've always done it. Tawadi, I've heard that one too. Whenever I hear that, it's like a red flag in my head that says, we need to change something if we've always done it that way. Sometimes tradition is good and sometimes it can also hinder us. Number 3, this is a tough one. I'm just going to go ahead and admit this is a tough one for leadership, especially. Teachers have this fear as well, this risk of being exposed or judged. And I think what happens is you're thinking, well, if I do something different and try something new with a community and it fails again, it could blow up in my face spectacularly. And next thing you know, like I said, I'm on social media, I'm on the news, and things just didn't work out. And so it has to be thought out when you're taking these risks. And then you have to be able to identify, here's where we tried something, here's where we messed up, and be transparent with it. And I think sometimes we in schools, but also, in companies do this too, where they're afraid to admit where they made a mistake. They're like, well, we never made a mistake. It was this was just bad luck or something. No, instead, you should say, here's where we made a mistake and here's how we fix that mistake to make it better experience for your kids or for our learners. And I think that's important too. I do think sometimes when we feel exposed like that, we kind of feel like Adam Sandler in this scene, which I'll just play a little snippet of.
Mr. Madison, what you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Okay, a simple wrong would have done just fine, but
yeah, it's never going to be that bad. It's never going to be that you're getting exposed in front of a full audience of people that are calling you out on that. But in some ways, we feel that way. We feel like if we try something different, maybe there's going to be this judgment that's happening to all of us, right? And some of that goes back to the mindset. Some of it goes back to what some of you are saying in the chat, is that growth mindset. And I think that's important. Again, it's part of this community of what we're trying to build here. Now, number 4 is one that not only have I struggled with, but also I know students that have struggled with this. And this idea that everything has to be perfect before you actually try it and before you actually put something out there. So if you're a teacher and you're designing a lesson, all of a sudden you feel like, well, if it's not absolutely perfect, I'm not going to even try it with my students. If you're a student who's trying to complete a project and maybe there's something that's wrong, maybe something's not right, the font looks weird, or maybe the drawing that you're doing. I had a first grade student do this once where he would sit there and just erase and erase and erase and erase and redraw it every time. So much so that we would get ready to go to lunch. And this poor student is basically in tears under his desk, crying because he feels like he can't move forward with it. And I think when you think about, perfection in some ways is the enemy of done. It's something that I've had to kind of just accept. And I talked to this student with it, and it didn't happen overnight with him. But over time, what I would tell him is like, what you've done here is great. You've put great effort toward this. You shouldn't dismiss that at all. And so getting them to understand, or getting students to understand, or even yourself to understand that, like, you know what, at some point it's good enough. We're going to move forward with it, right? It's not always going to be perfect. Now, the last 2, number 5, and I think this one particularly is kind of tricky because it's in school, especially, we are faced with what I call a time famine, which means we already have a very limited amount of time in our classroom with our students. I've had a teacher once tell me, my job isn't to teach the kids, my job is to teach the content. And I tell them, your job is to teach both. It's not just about teaching content, it's about teaching the kids and helping them learn and grow. To which sometimes they'll say to me, no, I don't have time for that. I have to keep going. And when you make a mistake, a lot of times you'll feel like, man, I just wasted a whole bunch of time. I'll give you a quick example. A couple of years ago, I still do this now in my daughter's schools, but when I was an administrator, I substitute taught every year. I think it's important, by the way, if you're a leader listening to this right now, put yourself in the classroom at least once a year, if not more. That means actually go to a classroom, take over, tell the teacher to leave for a little bit, and just try to teach. I think it's important that we're all instructional leaders in some form or fashion. And so one year, this was a couple of years ago, I got to teach my daughter's 4th grade class, and we were doing this lesson on we were using these little robots called spheros. I don't know if you remember those little like ball, sphero ball things. And I didn't know this at the time, but when you charge them, you put them in these big charging bins, and there's 12 of them in the bins, and I had them all charged. And the next day I thought, I'm going to unplug this and I'm going to take it to the classroom so the next day it'll be ready. Apparently overnight, what ends up happening is the charge starts to wear out. And so I get to the class the next day. I tell the teacher, hey, I'm taking over. Go ahead and get out of here. We're going to do this BattleBots challenge, this amazing thing where the kids are playing with the robots and they're designing these like little kind of covers and shields using Dixie cups and different types of like paper plates and things like that, basically creating these battle robots. And it's going great until we start to turn them on. And all of a sudden I realize that all of these spheros are absolutely dead. And immediately I go to this thought in my head. I just wasted all of our time. You know, in my first instinct as a teacher, even back then, not too long ago, was to say, all right, what do we do? What do we do? Maybe we just take out our notebooks and write about what this could have been about. You know, so I just kind of challenged. And I thought, you know what? Let me try something different. And since that day and every day going forward, I always do this when I work with students. And I look at them and I said, guys, this is something different. This is something new. I've never tried this before. These things are dead. We don't know what to do. What should we do? Ask the students. The students have creative ideas. And actually, by allowing yourself to show that you messed up and took a risk and failed, they'll lean in even more and they'll want to help out. In fact, 2 students said, hey, I've got a great idea. If we plug these 2 directly into the wall, we can at least charge 2 at a time pretty quickly and allow for like 5 to 10 minutes of charge to do these battle bots. And they sat there and they set up like a pit crew station. I was like, this is amazing. It ended up being a better lesson than it ever could have been because I allowed myself some vulnerability, took a risk and failed. And the kids came up with creative ideas. I love it too. Whenever I start new things with students. Yeah. Priscilla mentions the students love to test things for me. Yeah, that's great. When you mention that and you say like, hey guys, this is different. We're going to try something that no one else has tried. They get excited about it. I don't care if they're, you know, in kindergarten or seniors, they'll still get excited about trying something different. Now, this last one is one that, again, speaks to culture. And I think this is kind of tricky. I think you have to be real careful when you're trying new things. And I mentioned this earlier. If you're on a team that it maybe has a stifling leader, or there's somebody in your campus or in your building that doesn't like new ideas, this can be a challenge because you're trying to create this culture of learning. But if you're unable to share a great idea, then a lot of times, you know, even if it could be potentially better for the entire institution, because of the culture, you're not able to share it at all. And in classrooms, this happens quite a bit. There's always a fear that if you say something kind of silly or outlandish or creative or different, that you'll be ridiculed or made fun of, especially, by the way, when you get to middle school and high school. Because at an early age, kids kind of embrace it. But as you get older, you'll notice that kids tend to be more against trying something different or new because they're afraid, again, they'll get judged or it'll be rejected by their peers. So you have this kind of balance of risk and rejection. And it's a challenging thing. One thing I will tell you, just a quick personal story. My oldest daughter suffers tremendously from this. She's afraid, not as much now. We've worked with her and I'll show you actually one of the ways we did it was what I'm about to share with you. But she was even afraid at an early age to, like, we'd go to a restaurant and I would say, I want you to tell the server, you know, what you want to drink, what you want to eat and order. And she just had fear of, like, what if, you know, I'm embarrassed, I'm shy, really shy, like almost like paralyzing herself because of the social anxiety of dealing with talking to a stranger. But then it came down to a lot of it was she's like, oh, I'm afraid I might say it wrong or, you know, something like that. And so there's this fear of being rejected by the stranger. And so why even take the risk? And so in doing some research around this, I actually happened across this young man. His name is Zhai Zhang. And I actually have his resources. I'm going to share, by the way, at the end of this, I forgot to tell you, a Wakelet with all of the resources that I'm sharing with you. So all these websites will be shared, I think, and we can actually post it on the Wakelet for this session. But one of the things I came across was this idea of rejection therapy. So this gentleman, what happened was he was from China and he moved to Austin, here where I'm at in the United States. And I got to meet him and talk with him a little bit about this. But basically, he wanted to become the next entrepreneur, the next Steve Jobs, the next Bill Gates, the next big person that's going to create and change something different in the world. And he was working with a tech company at the time to kind of get himself started. But what he realized was that he was always just kind of a little cog on the wheel and that he was in an environment that didn't really help him be creative. So his wife tells him, she's 6 months pregnant at the time, and says, here, if you really want to do this, if you really want to go out there, you're going to have to take a risk. You're going to have to quit your job and go out there and try something new. So what he ends up doing is he goes out and he starts his career, this new business. But what happens, the first person, the second person, the fifth person, they continue to have the same response for him. And the response is always no, 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 no. He continues to get rejected. So he gets no funding. And eventually he becomes so depressed that he basically is afraid to leave his house for fear of getting rejected from anything. He's just looking around every corner for rejection. And so he creates this thing called rejection therapy. He actually goes in and does some research around it and decides to do his own 100 days of it. And so what he does is pretty amazing. He takes his camera and he starts to record himself trying to get rejected. And so it's kind of small there on the screen, but if you can see at the bottom, basically his first rejection, he goes out into Austin and he basically holds up his camera and says, hey, I'm going to try to borrow $100 from a stranger. And he goes and records himself asking strangers for $100. All of them say no, but he gets kind of like, all right, this isn't too bad. I'm going to desensitize myself to it. What's amazing is, even though he starts asking these crazy things, sometimes the answer isn't no. Sometimes the answer is yes. So I'm going to share this next video with you. And it's actually a video. This is something that he did. This is his third attempt at rejection out of the 100 days. This is called, he goes into a Krispy Kreme and basically, well, I'll let you watch it and see if you can, hopefully you can hear this. Okay, there we go.
I'm driving toward Krispy Kreme. I'm gonna ask them to make me some specialized donuts, and we'll see what happens.
What kind of specialized donuts are we talking about?
I like to have getting a you link the 5 donuts together, make them look like Olympic symbols.
Oh. And when are you looking to these?
Huh?
When?
The next 15 minutes. No, just you got the 5 donuts together, look like a Olympic symbol.
Was it this way this year?
Something like that. That would work. Just link any 5 donuts together. It's gonna be awesome.
Try, but what do you think?
Wow. That is really good. That's really good. Yeah.
I mean, that's the best I could do with what we've got.
No, it's good. It's good. It's more than I thought would be done. So great. All right. All right. So do I pay there?
Don't even worry about that one's on me.
Are you serious?
Ditto. Ditto.
You serious?
Very. Extremely.
Wow.
Extremely. That's my pleasure.
All right, Jackie. I'll take it. But man, you make me really happy today. All right. Thank you.
Very
All
welcome.
right. See you. Give me a hug. Okay.
Enjoy.
All right. Thank you. See
You're
you.
welcome.
Wow. Sometimes you make a crazy request, you get an awesome answer. Jackie, who works for Krispy Kreme in Austin, Texas, thank you.
I just, that video gets me every time. I love the fact that, again, you see there, she Googled and actually got the colors right. Like she was like making sure that, she did the research on it. And actually that video kind of goes viral for a little bit. And you can see on this list here, it's number 3, asked for Olympic symbol donuts. And he goes back and talks to her and does another interview with her. And she said, that day was an interesting day for her because she's in this position where she continues to just make the same thing every day, making donuts every day, the same donuts every day, the same. And when he came in there and asked for this, she was like, what an opportunity to be creative, to try something different. Right. And I love how I think, and I can't remember who it was in the chat who said this too, but Stephanie DeYoung, you have a 50% chance of yes, but not asking, you have a 100% chance of no. That's absolutely right. One of the philosophies that we've started to really embrace in our house is that no is the first hello, meaning the first time someone says no to you, that doesn't mean that's the last time. You can still continue to figure out a way to work around it. Don't take no as the only answer. There is another way around it. Now, I will say, for those of you that are parents, the challenge is when you tell them that, then they do it back to you. So when I say, no, you're not allowed to do that. What do you mean? This is the first hello. I can say, no, except for when I say it, then it's definitely no. No, but I enjoy, and I will tell my kids, I'll challenge them like, hey, if you can come up with a really good reason why you want to have TikTok on your phone, or you want to watch this video that maybe is a little more scary than what you're used to. I need to know the reasoning behind it. We need to talk about it and discuss it. Don't just take no as a flat out answer. And so again, with these barriers of creativity, it's interesting because even if you have a chance to go back, let me just go back to this real quick. If you have a chance to go look at some of his stuff, it's just hilarious. Because there's one where they're having a Super Bowl party in this neighborhood, and he and his wife just pull up, and there's a bunch of cars in front of a house. It's a stranger. He doesn't know the house. And he and his wife go up with a 6-pack of beer and some chips, and like, hey, can we come in and watch the Super Bowl with you? We're just strangers. And they're like, no, you can't, get out, and then, but sometimes people just start to say yes. I mean, he's flying on a Southwest Airlines flight, and he says, nobody ever listens to you when you do that announcement for safety. Can I just do the announcement for safety? And so he does it. They say, yeah, sure, why not? It's amazing how many people will actually start saying yes to him. He asks a waitress in a restaurant if he could dance with her to the music that's playing overhead, and she says, yeah, okay. So he jumps up and starts dancing with this waitress. It's just interesting, again, over and over again, kind of desensitizing yourself to the rejection. But again, if you don't ever try it, you'll never know. Because again, that's 100% no, as Stephanie mentions in the chat. If you're not taking that risk, it'll always be no. So again, looking at these barriers, and you may identify them with them differently. I'll call out a few words here. I think it's important to kind of think about some of these words. When it comes to, a lot of negativity that comes around these barriers too, the discomfort, the rejection, the judgment, all of those things are playing a role whenever you're trying something new or different or taking a risk. And all of this really lends itself to kind of my final few points here. And that is, we need to be sure that we're creating this culture of learning, not only in our classrooms, but throughout our campus and our community. I think a lot of times we assume that the only learners are those kids that are in our building. The learners are everybody. In fact, in my book, I made a point of never calling anybody students or teachers. Everybody's a learner. If you're on this, watching this right now, you're a learner, right? You're here to learn. You're taking your time to actually learn something new, try something different. And I like this phrase of a learning organization, which comes from a very reputable source. It's called Wikipedia. Well, no, not that. It's okay. It's close enough. But essentially, I love the definition here. And a learning organization is defined as an organization that facilitates the learning of all of its members and continuously transforms itself. Think about that. Are you in an organization that does this? Are you in an organization that tries to get you to learn new things, that encourages you to do this? That when you try something different and you learn from that mistake or that failure, you're embraced with it. It goes to a lot of different ideologies, and there's admittedly some risk and challenge when a leader embraces this as well, because things can happen that can go wrong. But at the same time, the magic happens in these moments, right? That comfort zone, getting out of that comfort zone is so important. I'll share just a couple of quick stories and examples of this as well. And the first one is, this comes from the Japanese auto industry. And then back in the 1980s, the Japanese auto industry was not doing well here in the United States. And again, using business as an example, but there's an educational element to this. And I think what ends up happening is you have this, they had innovation was kind of being stifled. And when they went in and identified what the problem was, they said what was happening is that these great ideas were happening on the factory floor. But the problem is by the time those ideas would travel all the way up to the CEO or the person in charge, a lot of times they were squashed, they were changed, they were different, or they weren't allowed to go to the CEO. So mid-management was kind of stopping those great ideas. Some of you may be in an institution or workplace environment where this happens. Now, what they decided to do is enact this thing called a gemba, which is a Japanese terminology about, we're all in this together. Everyone's voice is kind of the same. And they created this circle, and you can see it right here on the factory floor, where everybody is on the same footing, literally and figuratively. The HR department, the IT department, factory floor, the CEO, everybody stands in the circle and everyone has equal footing. Now, translate this to education. I was working with a school in Virginia a few years ago, and it was an all-boys middle school. So try to imagine that, first of all. That's really fun, if you can imagine. But if you don't know this about middle school boys, the teen tween age boys, they tend to be a little snarky, a little sarcastic. I know, I'm kind of surprised too when I found out. But instead, what they end up doing is this teacher is like, we have to quit being snarky with each other. We need to start accepting everyone else's ideas, because what's happening is the ideas are being squashed. And so she creates a gemba in her classroom. She takes some painter's tape and writes a little marker on the tape. And essentially every time a student starts to act sarcastic or dismissive of someone's idea, all the kids have to stand up and stand in a circle. All right, guys, let's get in the gemba. She would say, get in the gemba, let's go. And she'd do this over and over again over a period of several weeks and months, basically to change the culture in her classroom. And what happened is I asked her a few months later, I said, what's going on? How did this happen? And what happened with it eventually, she said, is she ended up not having to use this Gemba ever again, because at that point, the culture had been so, she'd ingrained it in them to whenever someone did share an idea, that they would add to that idea. And we kind of identified through her, what she did in her classroom, this idea of this culture of learning and kind of the finer points of things that she encouraged that I also try to encourage in my environments that I worked in. And that is, encouraging and enabling collaboration. This is huge. This is not just within your classroom, but also throughout your school building. It's celebrating successes, but also celebrating the thoughtful risk, because again, anybody can be successful, but again, taking a risk and trying something different and failing, we need to celebrate those too. If it's thoughtful, again, not just any risk, but a thoughtful one. Having opportunity to not only work with others, but also be independent. So again, this is kind of counterintuitive to that top bullet. And then one thing that I struggled with, admittedly, early in my teaching career, taking time to reflect. It's such an important part of the process. When do we allow time to actually reflect on what we've done and what we've learned and how do we recover from it? I think that's a big part of it. And then the last point is one that whenever I do workshops with large groups, we always do what's called the yeah, but versus yes, and challenge. And it's eliminating the yes, but or the yeah, but from your life. And what it basically means is it's taking the terminology and the phrase. And those of you that have ever been familiar with improv or theater work know this yes, and philosophy. By the way, companies like Pixar and Apple and Google have adopted the same yes, and philosophy. And that is whenever someone shares an idea with you, rather than shooting it down right away, add to it. So if I come up to you and say, hey, I'm going to try using Wakelet in my classroom, I'm going to have the kids kind of create these discussion boards and curate kind of resources. A teacher that is dismissive of that would say, yeah, but what if they put stuff on that they're not supposed to put on? Or yeah, but what if the internet doesn't work? Or yeah, but how do we set up their, Wakelet accounts? But the teacher that is accepting says, yes, and we could also collaborate our boards together. We could join boards together and share them all at the same time. Or maybe a teacher that says, I'm creating this amazing board that we can use for these kind of math creative problem solving ideas. We can share this with our community at large, so other schools and actually families can take advantage of it. So again, adding to that idea, and it's just a simple turn of a phrase, yes, and versus yeah, but. And so whenever I work with organizations that are really working through change and really trying to get this idea of acceptance of change, I start with leadership and say, this is the first thing we have to tackle. You have to be in a role where you can accept other people's ideas and yes, and whatever their idea is. There are times when you have to say no. And I tell teachers that they're like, well, we can't say yes to everything. I was like, yeah, you're right. You can say no, but you could say no, but have you thought about this? So again, you could say no to something and say, well, that's not going to work, but here's an idea that might work. So again, you're adding to the idea, or maybe you're changing it just a little bit, but it's not completely negative. And so kind of thinking about this in a different lens. Yes, and add to the conversation. That's right, Kristen. It's this idea that we're going to create a cycle that involves not only the teacher and the students, but also student to student and community to student. And so this learner-centered learner cycle is a big part of it. And again, this is included in the Wakelet board that I'm going to be sharing with you on this page. But essentially, in reflecting on things we do well in school, we teach new knowledge and skills really well. That's our job. Number one job we feel like is let's make sure students know this information and they know these skills. Did it? Check. Good. We're done. The truth is learning doesn't stop right there, because there also needs to be some level of authentic application, meaning do the students have a chance to try out this new skill or this new idea? So we do this a little bit, so schools are doing this project-based learning. I think that's a big part of it. So again, these two things, maybe we see a lot of in school. These next two, not so much. Is there a chance for mentoring, coaching, or peer feedback? Like, is there actual, is it a formative assessment that the student is able to learn and grow from? Is it a mistake that they made or an iteration of a project that they're doing where instead of just turning it in and saying, I'm done, you turn it in and say, looks like we're almost finished here. This is good. But I need you to go ahead and try to iterate or change it just a little bit more. So again, changing those ideas, changing those strategies, and giving them an opportunity to have that feedback. And then the last one, like I mentioned earlier, is the one that we struggle with the most. And it's this idea that there is just not enough time in our day to actually go in and learn and reflect on things that we're trying, right? And so this is a tricky one. And I always tell people, and Wakelet, by the way, is a great opportunity for this. Wakelet is a great way to reflect. And in a second, we'll share my Wakelet board again out there for you guys that are asking about it. But having that opportunity to reflect, and this could be 1 minute at the end of your classroom or 1 minute at the end of your class period. And it doesn't have to be write it down or create a blog or make a video. It could be just internally reflect on something you learned. Today, you've been learning through lots of different sessions during the Wakelet Community Week. And this whole week, whenever I attend a session, I always think to myself, what is one thing I learned? What is one thing I could take away from this? And I think if you can take one thing away from a session, that's a very successful session. I think if I've learned something new today, that's a good thing for me. And it's a good thing for my students because then I can apply what I learned new for my students. And so just a last couple of quick things here. Oh, thank you. And they just shared the Wakelet there for you if you want to take a look at it. Again, thinking of failure in a different lens. And I think this is all coming back to full circle what we're talking about with schools and trying this in your institutions. So here's a couple of quick ideas and strategies. One is, there's this idea and belief that failure can be blameworthy, meaning there is people that do try to actively defy you. They may actively try to undermine what you're doing with a project or idea or concept. Or maybe they're just not paying enough attention, or maybe they're not prepared, or they don't have the ability. When I got in that Jeep and started driving on that sand, my wife started driving on it. We didn't have the knowledge that we needed to deflate the tires. So some of it was just our own lack of understanding and maybe process inadequacy. But then on the other side of this, you've got the positive part, the praiseworthy part, right? Exploratory testing, hypothesis testing. As a tech director, the magic word that I could never say no to was pilot. When a teacher said, I want to pilot something new in my classroom, if they had thought it out and had great strategies behind it, I would allow it to happen as long as it's something that was communicated to the parents and they want to try something different. That is testing. And again, testing it and then determining whether it is a success or not. Because sometimes we pilot, but we're not really piloting. We're just like, we're going to try this and then we're just going to keep doing it instead of actually analyzing it and saying, was it successful or was it not? Let's go ahead and review it. And then these last two are kind of important too. And it's like kind of this grid that I set up with this zone of learning in the middle where you have people that are successful, but they make a bunch of mistakes. Maybe they're just successful because they're lucky, right? Or maybe they failed because they just had a lot of mistakes. They weren't really paying attention. They weren't really prepared. And because of that, they failed. That happens. That happens a lot. And then they have this middle area, which are the experiments. You tried something new and it worked and you learned from it. That's great. Or you tried something new, it didn't work, but you still learned from it. That's also great. Again, when we're talking about the spheros and trying something different and learning that, oh yeah, you have to charge them overnight, or having those chargers set up and the students having an opportunity to learn from that. And then you have people that are really well practiced, meaning they take a lot of time and energy to really develop an idea, a strategy, a lesson, an experiment, and they practice over and over again, and eventually it turns into a success. And then you also have the opposite of that. Maybe you practiced, maybe you studied, maybe you made sure that everything was perfect, and then on the day when you try it, it fails, maybe just due to bad luck. And this is things that happen. This happens a lot. This kind of zone for learning needs to happen in the middle. So again, I told you I was going to end with a strategy. And this is a strategy that a principal in Illinois shared with me. And it's a very simple idea. What they said is, I want you to, every day, she told me, she's like, I'm trying to get my staff to take risks. And so she developed this kind of very analog idea of like, I'm going to take these 3 colored folders you see here, green, yellow, and red. And I want them to pin them up on their walls. And so when your green folder is up on your door, that means you're welcome to come to my classroom and visit. We're rocking it. Everything's going good. If it's a yellow folder, that means you can come in, but know that we're trying something new. We're taking a risk and it might fail, meaning the classroom could be loud, could be a little chaotic. And then the last folder is nothing to see here. Just move along, right? It's great, but sorry, we don't have any time for this. So you're just going to have to move along. And it's funny how things change with these students, because as you walk through these hallways, you would see the teachers would see these folders, but also the students would see them. And some days it looks like this, all red folders, because, it's testing day. But other days, lots of yellow, because again, the teachers were trying something different. So all of a sudden you have teachers sharing things between departments, students wondering what's happening there. And all of a sudden there's this kind of idea and ideology that they are taking that first attempt in learning. They are trying something different and they're planning something. They're taking that risk and strategy to move forward with their students. And I think this gets to my final point, and that is this. I think when you think about it, students don't take risks if teachers aren't willing to do it. If you're set up an environment in your classroom where everything is very locked down, everything is very rote and memorized, and things have to be exactly the way you want them, students aren't going to try something different and try something creative. But I'm going to extend this a little bit further. Teachers also will not take risks if leaders aren't willing to try something different. You have to be willing to fail epically sometimes to really get that mindset and that culture brought across in your classrooms and in your schools. So those of you that are leaders in this chat or listening to this conversation, I encourage you to take those risks, to step outside of your comfort zone, get out there, take a risk, and fail, and continue to move forward and learn. Thank you guys so much. I have, again, the book, I think we talked about a little bit. Wakelet's giving away free copies of this today. You have a chance to earn it throughout the Wakelet community. By the way, DMC approved, if you know DMC from Run DMC, not officially, so don't take a picture of that. But here's my information. There's the Wakelet, James. Thank you for asking for it. I think you guys threw it up there as well, and there's a certificate for session. We hit it right at 4:30. Look at that, my time.
Yeah, that was perfect. Wow, Carl, thank you so much. I think I speak on behalf of the whole Wakelet team and the community. That was incredible, and you've definitely got everyone thinking differently in the chat, and you can see all the comments now coming through. No, thank you so much for that, Carl. We really appreciate you jumping on for Community Week. And like I say, getting people to think a bit differently, getting ready to fail. And I know it resonates with a lot of people in the chat, so thank you so much for that.
Thank you guys so much, and thank you again, Wakelet, for this Community Week. You guys enjoy the rest of the week. I'm excited to see some of the sessions later this week as well. Hopefully you'll win some of those amazing prizes.
Yeah, of course. And like we said at the start, Carl's book is in those swag packs. I'll hold up again. I know it's on screen there as well, the cover. But yeah, if you want to win one of these from Carl, as well as some Wakelet swag, Community Week swag, we've got some iPads up for grabs and that trip to ISTE 2023. Please share all those ideas you learned from the week. But I know a lot of people had a lot of ideas from what you said there, Carl. So any screen grabs, any comments, throw them onto Twitter. Make sure you follow and tag Carl as well at Mr. Hooker. Give him some Wakelet love because that was absolutely incredible. Carl, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you again on another Wakelet session.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great
Cheers.
day. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you very much.